Good evening, Karina Carvalho with ABC News. The High Court has spoken and 5 of the Citizenship 7 have lost their seats in the federal parliament. Among them, Barnaby Joyce, whose immediate departure robs the Prime Minister of his absolute parliamentary majority. For the government to get that back, Mr Joyce needs to win the seat of New England again in a by-election in December. Over the next hour, we'll have special coverage of today's decision with political editor Andrew Probin and Anthony Green. We'll speak to our reporter in Tamworth, and later Lee Sales interviews Barnaby Joyce and Labor's Tony Burke. But our coverage begins with National Affairs correspondent Greg Jennett.
Well, justice moved quickly. In less than 3 blistering minutes, the careers of the 5 who fell foul of the Constitution were over, and salvation came for 2 who did not. The Parliament's never had so many of its number in conflict with the Constitution before, and although the Citizenship 7's now been sorted, there's much about national politics that's still in flux. To explain and to recap an unprecedented episode in constitutional conflict, here's our political editor, Andrew Probin.
I was born just there. And, I grew up over there.
In the end, it didn't matter how dinky-die he looks or feels, he was a Kiwi all along. A 44-page judgment laid ruin to 5 parliamentary careers. The High Court's biggest scalp is Barnaby Joyce, Nationals leader and Deputy Prime Minister.
In my gut, I reckon this is the way it's going to go.
His deputy and fellow Cabinet Minister Fiona Nash has been similarly ousted.
She is a staunch friend, a very, very good colleague.
One Nation's pugnacious climate sceptic Malcolm Roberts has been expelled to colder climes.
I've lost a great man in Malcolm Robertson. He's been my backbone.
2 Greens, Scott Ludlam and Larissa Waters, have been wiped, vindicating their own decisions to resign from Parliament.
They acted with integrity, with honesty. They took responsibility for their actions.
Of the 3 government members facing judgment, the only one to quit his cabinet post but not his seat, Matt Canavan, has been spared. He's not an Italian after all, and soon to be returned as one of the PM's consiglieri.
Feeling lucky?
Well, yeah, let's go count you up in a sense.
But I will be leaving.
The only other politician spared by the High Court, Nick Xenophon, is going anyway, returning to state politics.
Nick, he got back, but he still wants to go, so I don't know how you deal with that. But anyway, Nick, do you want a swap, mate?
The irony of the decision is not lost on me.
Government reaction to the decision was necessarily swift. A writ for a by-election in Barnaby Joyce's seat was issued.
The people of New England will have their say on the 2nd of December.
But with the government now reduced, at least temporarily, to a bare 75 seats, questions of its survival came.
Can you survive a no-confidence motion?
We have the support of a majority of members. We have a majority of members on the floor of the House of Representatives, and we enjoy the support of the crossbench.
Matt Canavan's survival aside, the only good news for the government today is that Tony Windsor won't be contesting New England against Barnaby Joyce. That loomed as a brutal battle. But Malcolm Turnbull now faces a Labor Party determined to show that his grip on power has slipped. Government won't fall, but there's plenty of scope for it to look chaotic.
I would remind people that there have been some very significant votes that have been lost by 1.
They're fighting words, but so are these.
I'm going to make sure that I don't cry my beer. I'm going to get back to work and work hard.
He's failed the court test.
Your father's a bloody Kiwi, you get penalised.
Yep.
Now for the pub test.
So Barnaby Joyce is tonight an ex-politician and also an aspiring one. To get back into Parliament, he now has to convince more than 100,000 voters in New England that his dual citizenship mistake should be forgiven. And our reporter, Anna Henderson, is in his hometown of Tamworth. Anna, Mr Joyce's by-election hopes were helped enormously within hours of the High Court decision. So why has his old rival, Tony Windsor, decided not to stand?
Well, Greg, Tony Windsor had actually joined the High Court action against Barnaby Joyce. His lawyers helped argue that Barnaby Joyce was ineligible as a Member of Parliament, and he left the door wide open to running in this seat for months, criticising Barnaby Joyce on personal and policy fronts. He was considered the most serious by-election threat to the sitting member. Today, once it was clear a by-election was going to be held, Tony Windsor said he would not be a candidate. He didn't rule out a run at some future date in the upper house, but he said he wasn't going to contest an upcoming by-election. Let's take a listen.
I'm not particularly interested in just sitting on a green seat. It's never been my motivation in terms of politics, and I think there's probably another way of addressing some of these issues outside the system. And if they haven't been addressed, and I feel strongly enough that I may well run for the Senate. I may not. That's a decision of the future.
So, Anna, without Tony Windsor in his way, what do we know about the hot button issues in the New England electorate?
Well, just getting a sense of what's happening in New England is not the easiest thing, because this is an area that has regional centres, it has cities, it has towns, it spans from the Upper Hunter to the Queensland border. But as we've been speaking to people here, certainly education, health, water policy, the NBN, telecommunications issues, and generally issues about regional areas in the bush have come up time and time again. We know in a by-election scenario that Labor, the Greens, One Nation, the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party and other independents are all considering their options, and there are other candidates who will put pressure on Barnaby Joyce. Today he was defending what he's delivered for this electorate.
It's a pretty simple story. We're off to a by-election, and I put myself forward to the people of New England as their candidate. Love me or hate me, I think I work pretty hard. And I thank you so much for your support you've given me, and I will return it in spades as I continue on my work for this great electorate.
So, former MP Barnaby Joyce, and before him, our reporter Anna Henderson in Tamworth. Now, our political editor, Andrew Probin, is back with us now in the studio. And Andrew, the government is short a member when Parliament resumes. How testing will those last 2 sitting weeks be in the House for the government?
Well, Labor has its own bitter memories of tight numbers, and there's no doubt that it will use the government's reduced numbers, diminished numbers, to test the government on fronts like the penalty rates decision. Perhaps some ministerial decisions will be challenged too on the House, and they might even try on a banking royal commission.
But its numbers aren't seriously threatened in that sense. It still commands something of it.
That's right. It has got assurances from the crossbench, or important people in the crossbench, Cathy McGowan, that it will not be challenged and not be brought down by a vote.
OK, so we've seen a minor adjustment to the front bench today. When will the Prime Minister embark on a bigger makeover of his ministry?
Well, that will come in December. Obviously, this all has to be sorted out, has to be played out. But the decision, especially Fiona Nash disappearing from the front bench, changes the complexion, and therefore the complexity of the cabinet reshuffle will be more. And I tell you what, they're going to have to put more women into cabinet. So if you're the likes of, say, Karen Andrews, then a cabinet posting awaits.
All right, and finally, Andrew, Mr Turnbull's delayed a commemorative trip for World War I to the Middle East, but he does still intend to go. Who will be acting Prime Minister in his absence?
Well, I understand that this is causing quite a considerable heat inside the coalition. The Liberals, of course, blame the Nationals for bringing this misery upon the government. It was 3 Nationals whose positions were in question. So there's no automatic acting prime ministerial role waiting for the Nats. So we might have a situation where we have a leader in exile being Barnaby Joyce. We might have a parliamentary leader of the Nats being Nigel Scullion. But it's not out of the question that Julie Bishop could be acting PM when the real Prime Minister leaves for other parts of the world.
Certainly one to watch. Andrew Probin, I'm sure you'll be doing just that. Thanks for your analysis.
Thanks, Greg.
Now, political reporter Matthew Doran has been following the Citizenship 7's journey through the High Court, their legal arguments, and finally today, their fate. He explains the constitutional effect of today's decision.
Something those on Capitol Hill were yearning for from today's decision was a sense of clarity as to how to interpret Section 44(1) of the Constitution. Since 1992, there's been one key test. In the case of Sykes and Cleary, the High Court found someone had to take all reasonable steps to renounce their dual citizenship. The argument put forward by some in the Citizenship 7 was they had no idea they were foreigners, and how can you renounce something you never knew you had? But today's judgment upholds that 25-year-old test. It rejects the argument that ignorance gets you off the hook of dual nationality and impresses the need on all candidates to exercise due diligence. It also states you can't be deemed to have a foreign allegiance if you can't enjoy the benefits that foreign citizenship brings. Some in Parliament House had called for an audit of all citizenship of all parliamentarians, but that, before today's judgment, would have been too premature. And apart from that, it also didn't have the backing of the major parties. One thing's for sure out of today's judgment, there will be some politicians on Capitol Hill checking their family histories.
And well, they might. Well, that's the latest from our Canberra team for now, but there's more analysis of today's extraordinary events ahead. Lee Sales is standing by with a special edition of 7:30.